Quick question. Have you ever watched a highly detailed City Skylines city and wondered how on earth did the creator actually achieve that? How did they make it look so realistic? Well, I think we've all been there at some point, but funnily enough, I sometimes experience the opposite. I find myself looking at a successful, realistic looking vanilla city and I wonder, how did they achieve that? Because I have around 3,000 hours of playtime in Cities Skylines, but just about 99% of all that time has been spent making highly detailed and heavily modded cities. If we count out the 12 straight hours I played on the launch night, I have more or less never actually dived into vanilla City Skylines, and thus I have next to no knowledge of the management aspects of this game. Now, if you're a regular to my channel here on YouTube, this might not surprise you, but if you're new, this is what my builds typically look like. I've basically always treated the game as a city painter because mods allow my cities to visually thrive despite lacks of services, utilities, and a budget deficit deeper than, I don't know, the Mariana Trench or something really deep, okay? But I want to change this, and what better way to change it than through a little challenge? And that is why I sit here with a fully vanilla game opened. I mean, besides a few visual mods and camera mods, you know. And I'm ready to attempt to build a realistically looking and feeling vanilla city that, most important of all, actually functions. You know, dollars in the bank, no poop water on the streets, and maybe a hospital or a school even. Something like that. Now here are the basics. I've grabbed the vanilla map Costa Azura from the Steam Workshop, link in the description, and then I've enabled Unlock All, because if this is supposed to be even remotely realistic, I, the mayor, a potentially corrupt, narcissistic individual, should be able to build anything I like, even if it destroys the very foundation of the city, because that is damn realistic. And don't worry, even though I have enabled Unlock Everything, I have adjusted my budget from the default 700 something thousand to about 100,000 through an advanced patented method. I placed the Statue of Liberty over and over again. Anyways, I think we're all set for this to kick off. Now, the first question that grew inside that feeble mind of mine was, how would starting a vanilla city differ from starting a heavily modified one? I wasn't quite sure, I don't build vanilla cities, but one thing I wanted to establish was the backstory for our city. Looking around the map, I used my magic narrative powers and decided that we are building a farming community based city somewhere along the Pacific Northwest coast of the United States. I know that the coastline is usually more mountainous in that area than this relatively flat stretch of land we have here, but I guess that just helps play into our backstory. This valley and coastline with open plains was the perfect spot for the first settlers when they were on the lookout for good arable land some 150 years ago. With my super creative backstory in place, I started laying out the original road layout of the city, and having at least picked up on a few things from vanilla players, I decided to utilize the cheaper gravel roads to build the layout. I made the initial layout quite gritty, as I find that a little easier to build with and fitting to the US-based theme. With this starting layout in place, I wanted to settle on a name for our new city, and to my surprise, the name that the vanilla game defaulted to, Clermont, had a nice ring to it. It sounded kind of French, and while French immigrants to the new land were more likely to settle on the northeastern coast of North America, I just went with it. Now, our first structures had to, be utilities, as despite being a complete noob at vanilla, I did figure that if I didn't establish power and water supply up front, this build would real fast turn into an awkward showcase of, involuntary off-the-grid living for my citizens and streets overrun with poop water. And I guess we don't want that, right guys? Seeing as I'm from Denmark, the idea of having wind turbines make up the bulk of the electricity production fit in nicely with my annoying progressive energy agendas. And so I was amazed to see that the game provides an overlay for where on the map it's most windy. It came as a bit of a shock, to be honest, that I had to buy an actual tile to place my wind turbines that are built at a local factory running on clean coal, because I don't buy tiles in Cities Skylines. Just let the 81 tiles mod do it all for me and I call it a day. Nonetheless, I grabbed my big boy wallet and bought the tile just north of my starting tile and started placing down the first couple of wind turbines. Another shock came as I realized they cost 6k credits a pop. Wow. I should have gone with coal, man. With electricity sorted, at least on the good windy days, people can freeze on the quieter days, I don't care. I placed down a water tower to provide fresh drinking water. The water tower is one of my most favorite vanilla assets, and I guess it's because it's one of the least vanilla assets. I hope that makes sense to someone out there. Going for a realistic approach to the city of Camont, which I know I called Clamont earlier because I'm terrible with words, I decided that all the piping would run underneath the established roads because that's usually the case in real life as well. With ample water supply in place, I almost forgot that I actually have to run power lines from my wind turbines and into the city to make this advanced electricity simulation stuff actually work. To try and mitigate the sort of funky look the vanilla power lines have, I made sure to stretch each segment as long as possible right before it would split the line into several segments and thus clutter it up with too many towers. In hindsight, this is time terribly spent if you actually want to get a city going, but seeing as I classify myself as a detailer in this game, I guess time terribly spent on details is actually sort of my jam. Now, to make sure I would not fall trap to the classic poop water situation, I went with this cool new inland water treatment plant that I had no idea was actually an option in vanilla. I knew immediately that since the tooltip stated it would spread this ridiculous looking purple ground pollution, I wanted to place it outside Camont and preferably in one of the city's initial industrial districts. I made a basic gravel road layout to accommodate the water treatment plant as well as future industry, and I once again found myself running water pipes beneath roads for realism. Even doing that in case of a bridge, which is completely nonsensical and stupid. I have to let you in on a little secret. By this time in the build, I hadn't actually checked my finances, and thus I carelessly did not consider that many of the decisions I'd already made were quite costly. Anyways, blissfully ignorant of the possibility of financial doom, some 10 minutes into the build, I start zoning out Camont's first industrial district on a freshly paved, paveless gravel roads. One reason I also went with this spot is that the map ships with some old train lines here, a natural harbor, and an old rundown factory just nearby. With industry zoned, it was time to zone in some residential. I started off by zoning all of Camont, and I mean all 4 blocks of Camont at least, with residential, and then I rezoned some of it as commercial near the Central T intersection in what I guess we could designate as downtown Camont. With our first residents moving in, I do a bit of light detailing with these new to me, quite nice looking trees that now ship with the vanilla game. Now I say light detailing, but as this build will soon reveal to the whole world, placing down nice looking shrubs and trees is pretty much my entire playbook for a vanilla build. Yeah, I take great pride in my creativity. If this was a modded build, I could at least also spam decals, but yeah, oh well. This is around the time where I actually take a good glance at the city's finances and feel my heart rate kinda accelerate a bit as I realize I've burned through more than half my moolah and I have a city of 170 something uneducated dirt poor people to show for it. Great success. So I do what any public servant would do in my case. I immediately bring up the taxes panel and scheme on how I can squeeze out some more hard-earned credits from my citizens. To my delight, I see that the default tax rate is 9%, and to a Dane such as myself, that tax rate is a complete joke. So I shortly consider raising it to a more Scandinavian feeling 40%, but then I speculate that a hike like that might actually have some adverse effects on the gameplay, and instead I imagine that the 9%, which I eventually do raise to 11%, is actually just a country tax, or county tax, and doesn't include federal taxes for instance. I guess I also need to remember that this build is based in America, baby, and taxes are inherently for the weak. So something, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, etc. With people starting to really move in, this one guy packing all his belongings on his scooter, I took a look at the first commercial establishments that has popped up in Camont. Nothing out of the ordinary, real small town stuff, bookstores, etc. But it also seems we've gotten our first commercial fund of an actual criminal enterprise, with this seemingly innocent barbecue hidden chill diner actually being a drugstore. Nice. I check in with our first industrial district, which I have for whatever reason named Oriental Flats, and you can imagine my amazement when I realize that there's a policy that removes the absolutely terrible looking purple ground pollution effect. Did I stress how much I disliked that? And without thinking twice, I for sure enabled that policy immediately. I decided to make a few of the warehouse assets historical, as I much prefer that lower density, non-chimney type industry to some of the really tall, blocky industrial vanilla assets. I realized that if I am ever to take Cameron out of the grasp of poverty and methamphetamine, I need to emphasize education. And so our first school, Cameron Elementary, I placed in a residential neighborhood just outside the commercial core of our city. I make sure to follow the American theme of realism we've got going here, and I immediately cut funding to the education system because education is for the, annoyingly progressive city folks, and out here we don't take kind to those types. I place a police station as well because, I'm all about law and order, I'm tough on crime. At least that's what I campaigned on, and through a little gerrymandering, winning wasn't all that hard. In my desperation of trying to make vanilla industrial areas look sorta nice, I start frantically detailing up parental flats. And if you wonder what in the name of the Dark Lord I was thinking when I placed these rocks, then you and me are much alike, and I do end up removing them again rather quickly. Instead, we go full ham on the shrubs, grass, and trees, and end up with an industrial area that overall looks a bit weird and ultimately gives off a bit more South Louisiana True Detective vibes than Pacific Northwest. But I digress, the first season of True Detective is cinematic history that you need to watch. A few citizens are complaining that their dead relatives aren't being picked up, so I set out to provide some death care. But upon realizing that a crematorium is insanely expensive, I choose to settle for a good old cemetery, placing it next to the remnants of a much older cemetery, and adding some dirt paths and trees, and in the end it all turns out rather nice. I continue with this newfound vanilla tree obsession and start adding tons of them in between Cameron's many single family houses. It was a little tedious at times, but supplying it with hard techno and a little too much coffee made it all the more pleasant, and I once again end up with an overall looking aesthetic that feels more reminiscent of a town in the deep south. I for a short second contemplate the idea of creating a Cities Skylines series based in southern Louisiana, centered around a murder mystery. Then I snap out of it and realize that I have more important matters at hand, trying to create a successful vanilla city. For real though, wouldn't that be cool? Responding to the massive demand for industry, I built another industrial district, this time placing it alongside the old factory and within the natural harbor inlet. I once again opt for zoning with quite a bit of distance in between each lot, as however weird it looks with all the trees and grass in between industrial buildings, I much prefer that look to a high density vanilla industry look. Yuck. This time around I also incorporate some random dirt paths and industrial fences to just add a bit of extra character to the area. Man, what I would do for some parking lot assets and a good concrete decal right now. Anyways, with the addition of much more industry, the labor market is thriving in the region and Cameron is experiencing massive demand for residential development. And so I choose to tackle this with two steps. First, I upzone some of the most central residential zones to allow for higher density developments in downtown. And second, more importantly I guess, I reach out and once again connect to my inner American spirit and begin expanding the city to the south with lots of low density, single family, detached house zoning. Yeah baby. It suddenly hits me that the city is nearing 1100 inhabitants and yet I still don't have a single farm placed. So much for the farming community backstory that I've fed you all off with. The trouble is that my tree addiction has put a severe strain on the city's finances, and so it is going to require years of balanced and mature budget management to save up enough capital to start a big farm expansion. Or alternatively, I can just grab the biggest loan of the most reputable lending shark business, aptly named Pyramid Capital. After spending a full 8 seconds carefully evaluating how the industry DLC farms actually work and how I avoid ruining my city to the ground by just doing random stuff, I start just placing random farms wherever I feel they would look nice. I add dirt paths, fences, lots of grass and trees, and try to work with what I got to detail up this area, and I must say, despite the obvious limitations when working with rectangular farming assets, the whole area does end up looking quite alright. Now imagine just how surprised I was to realize that 8 full seconds wasn't quite enough to get the hang of the inner workings of a management heavy DLC, and that Cameron is now bleeding money and absolutely tanking my economy. Most likely due to farming. I got back on the school bench and actually read a bit about the flow of goods and the economical aspects of farming, and with a few tweaks to my warehouse politics and I guess a bit of time as well, Cameron's countryside was finally making a profit. Some people would probably argue that making a profit once again was detrimental to my health as mayor of the city, as I instantly began funneling that profit into my tree placing obsession, planting more and more trees, shrubs, and grassy fields in attempts of adding beauty to the large swaths of cookie cutter residential neighborhoods that made up most of Cameron's urban landscape. With Cameron's population nearing 2000, I started feeling that the city had gotten a real solid foundation by now. The farmlands were thriving, sometimes turning a high profit, sometimes low profit, but always profit. Most residents had decent service coverage. Yeah, I could take a bit of a break, lean back, just watch the city flourish. It didn't take long for me to push for another farming expansion, this time adding lots of fruit tree fields and, of course, detailing it all up. For some of the gaps in between farm fields and residential neighborhoods, I pushed out the urban borders of Cameron, nestling in small residential areas in between farm fields, in an attempt to showcase how some of the city's sprawl is slowly but surely encroaching on former countryside and turning it into a wasteland of cheaply made single-family housing. Now I noticed that a commercial establishment in downtown was actually complaining rather loudly of something. So I initially considered employing a bit of eminent domain and running a 16-lane highway through the area. But eventually I got to my senses and looked into what this fella was actually sour about, and turns out that they were lacking educated workers. To remedy this, we constructed a high school for the city, adding simple paths and adding an expansion to the road layout and zoning lots of low-density residential. With Cameron's being in a good spot, I embark on another countryside expansion, and me being me, I make sure that the credits I spent are all borrowed from a shady lending business. I place down my new farms, make sure they're covered by utilities, and detail them a bit up. With continuously growing industrial demand, I created another industrial district to the east of Cameron, employing the same techniques I've used earlier to make it look okay-ish. With time running fast and me nearing the wrap-up of this fun little build, I built out more gravel roads and covered the area in beautiful pockets of shrubs and trees to just add some character and feel to the plains immediately surrounding the city. And with this addition, I'm ready to ask the question, have I managed to build a successful vanilla city? Well, I guess what I've learned from this small, fun build is that ultimately, each and every one of us defines the criteria for a successful city. Now, I would never claim to be one of the better detailers in this game, but I frequently receive comments on my content where people stress how much better I am at the game than them. And I always find this a bit odd, because unless the commenter and I have the exact same criteria of what defines a good or successful city, the same mods, the same assets, the same experience playing, then it's hard to define something in this game as being objectively better. Some people treat this game as a sandbox city painter, me included. Others treat it as a traffic manager, others treat it as a fully fledged simulation with a sprinkle of politics. I think this build really showcases that when I am presented with a fully vanilla game, I struggle immensely in achieving a look that at least I am satisfied with. The industrial areas pretty much all look the same, and I default to manically spamming trees in an attempt to add detail to areas where I definitely fall short when it comes to vanilla detailing. If I can't add something with a tree or a fence or a gravel path, I am all out of luck. Now, perhaps Cameron would look much better with much more playtime time, but the whole idea of this challenge was to just jump right into the shoes of someone that plays fully or nearly fully vanilla and see just how tough it would be for me. And it was tough, having to manage budgets, constantly monitor service and utility coverage, etc. All the things that I never bother with, but which comes completely natural to so many of you guys. Anyways, I'm starting to get derailed into a, feel-good tangent here. If you enjoyed this video, I would very much appreciate a like and a comment, and naturally, if you don't want to miss out on any future content, feel free to subscribe and enable all notifications. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you have a really good morning, day or evening, whatever it is where you're from. Bye!